how does rabbinite prayer work? Because the Torah implies that Torah says, it gives stories, prayers is what people do. It talks about people praying to God. There's no specific verse that says, you shall pray. The verses that say, oh, when you are in exile and then you're going to seek the Lord your God, and which certainly imply a kind of prayer. But what that looks like, the Torah doesn't tell. We have the Book of Psalms, which again, it contains all sorts of expressions of thanksgiving and praise and petition. But it doesn't say you shall do these things. So Jews got to pray, but there's not really any guidance from the Bible. There's maybe guidance, but there are no rules about what that's going to look like. So in the earliest rabbinic text, which is the Mishnah, there's already this concept of a bracha, a liturgical blessing, which each blessing concludes with the words Baruch Atah Hashem, and then two more words.
Tell us what liturgy is, because some of the audience might not know that word.
Okay.
You keep saying liturgical. What is the difference between liturgical and prayer?
Is formal prayer. Would you say that that's probably a good formalized prayer?
Yes, I would agree with that.
Given religion or faith community.
So in other words, prayer could be, it's minus 20 degrees outside and I'm freezing. I'm like, oh God, I'm cold. Please save me from this cold. I don't want to die. That could be prayer. And liturgy would be, I get out of the cold, then I say the Shehechianu blessing.
Sure.
Would that be liturgy?
It would be liturgical. Yeah. You're using a liturgical blessing.
So it's a formalized form of prayer. And then
the example you just gave was still very spontaneous. It's not that you said I went to the synagogue. So that's I hesitate. Okay. That's why I said I don't know if I call it liturgy. You're using a liturgical framework. Okay. Whereas opposed to if you go to the synagogue and they're all saying the blessing and it's something they do every day, then that's definitely liturgy.
So I want to explain for the Christian audience or people who came from a Christian background, and you may not know this terminology. I learned this myself interacting with Christians. They have a concept of what they call high church and low church.
Sure. Yeah.
High church is where you go to the church and there's these words that you recite at this time by this priest or whatever, or this pastor.
Who's wearing specific things, and there's a specific tune and a specific,
And here's the surprising thing. I would say every Jewish sect or movement is high church.
Interesting. I think you're right.
Even Reform Judaism is high church.
I think you're right. With perhaps some exceptions in the very recent.
Like renewal or something like that.
Yes, like renewal or like things online chabura things. Like, there's some of them, I think from a Christian point of view, it would still be high church, but I think some of them are not. Some of them are really low church. But again, they are outnumbered by far by high church. It's funny that you say this because within Judaism, you have certain groups will call others or call themselves high church because within that. Really? Yes. I mean, and they use it somewhat ironically because it's not church because we don't have churches. But like, I was just looking at a message like yesterday where it was saying that like, this specific synagogue where they're very careful about the cantor who's leading the services. Very careful on specific clothing and on reciting them to very specific melodies that are fixed and with a choir and whatnot. It's a very high church. And he put it in quotation marks, and he was not saying it in a derogatory. He was saying, I like it. He was saying, and he says, as opposed to there are an informal, what we call a shtibel, comes from the Yiddish word for a little house. And it's a little bunch of people get together and the words might be very similar to what you'll see in the, as we call high church synagogues. But the whole atmosphere is there is a prayer leader, but nobody's actually following along and everybody's at each person at each person's own pace. And
but within the context of Judaism, you don't with let's say I guess formal major movements within Judaism, you don't really have a concept, which you do in the Tanakh, which is spontaneous prayer. In other words,
there's certainly spontaneous prayer
in the synagogue.
No, yes, for the most part, not. I'm not saying people don't pray. There are definitely people who come to the synagogue, probably historically more women than men because there's been lower literacy. Okay. Because they haven't had the same kind of educational opportunities that men had. Not that all the men were so educated, but who would come to synagogue and they'd come and they'd say, "Oh, I'm coming to synagogue. I'm going to pray so much that I'm going to whatever."
And there's examples of like that. There's the famous. There's a famous Hasidic story about the man who comes to the synagogue and he's reciting the Aleph Bet in the back of the synagogue.
Right.
So that's an exception to the rule. What's so beautiful about the story?
I'm not saying so it goes on. No, so it goes on. It definitely goes on. You're saying.
And the reason I bring this up, and by the way, Karaites are more high church than even Rabbinites at their synagogues.
How so?
That?
How so?
So a typical Shabbat morning Karaite service will be around 4 hours in Israel.
In Israel, interesting. I mean, because in America it's much, much shorter.
Yeah, because no one would stick around. No one would stick around and pay attention for 3 or 4 hours. Let's say in certain times of the year, especially, it could easily be 4 to 5 hours, and that's not unusual. And all of it is.
Those times would be like Ben HaMetzarim or
Tammuz, for example.
Right, the years, the weeks Ben HaMetzarim or certain holidays or.
So you have, and it's all very formalized, right? The cantor reads a verse, the congregation responds. The cantor reads a half a verse, the congregation responds, right? So it's very formalized, and that's very much what Christians would call high church. And there's actually a section called Tfilah B'Lachash,
right?
Which is where you insert for 30 seconds a prayer in your own words.
So that's not high church.
In a sense, it is, because even that is formalized.
Because you're told when.
Right now, put in your own words.
In any synagogue, even if we say, okay, now you have this time to pray in your own words, we told you when to do it.
We've just been here for 4 hours. Now 30 seconds to a minute or 2 minutes in your own words.
Hold on.
Silently.
Hold on. So tell me, what's a church like then?
What's that?
What's a church like then?
I haven't been to that many churches. I don't really know.
So I don't know either.
So I'm maybe misusing the terms.
Know what goes on in low church.
Right? No, what I think goes on in low church is they say, "Oh, we're going to play a song on the band is going to play a song, and people are going to be waving around their hands and I could be completely wrong.
That's Pentecostal. That's Pentecostal.
So, for example, Pentecostal would be considered low church.
Low
absolutely.
Church. Okay.
I believe so.
Pentecostals have Pentecostals have any liturgy or no?
I don't know the answer to that. I have no idea.
Okay.
I don't know.
So we don't know. We're two Jews talking about how Jews. So we are two Jews talking to a largely Christian audience about how we're not like you. Wait, we don't know what you're like.
Oh, no, I wasn't trying to say we're not like you. My whole point was to say, what do we need all this pute for? And we need the pute because we're high church.
Right. Okay.
Now, maybe I'm wrong about that, but that's my understanding.
Maybe you're wrong about low church. Maybe you're wrong about low church, but you're explaining why we got it. Got it. Okay.
What do we need all of these pew team? Because we come to shul, we come to the synagogue on Yom Kippur, and we're there for 10 hours. What are we doing for 10 hours? We got to make ourselves.
We're not dancing and saying things in our words. Right.
In fact, the cantor is reciting liturgy the entire 8 to 10 hours. And that's literally 8 to 10 hours. I don't think I'm exaggerating, right?
12 hours in my synagogue.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
I don't think I ever made it 12 hours, but yeah.